Welcome to Dialogue of Exploration.
Julia, today we've decided to talk about conscious relationships.
We have, because we're sort of endeavouring to be in one.
We
Although
are,
I shouldn't say
aren't we?
sort of, should I?
We are in one.
We are in one. Well, yes, because that was something that we spoke about, because we met 7 months ago. And when we became conscious that we were wanting to go deeper in our relationship, we talked really early on about how that might be, that the space between us, which is where the relationship exists, how that would be a space where we could both feel safe to be together and grow together, and really mean that we could, both of us actually, experience what we'd always hoped for and dreamed of in relationship.
Absolutely. Which is actually conscious relating, which comes down to transparency and being responsible for the space that the relationship is created in.
Yeah, I think it's about making it, making the relationship the most important thing, and about the space being completely special and sacred, and never ever not paying attention to that. And that is in every relationship, because in our society we tend to talk about relationship as the one that exists in a kind of romantic context, or a couples or marriages, partnerships. But of course we exist in relationship all the time, in every single area of our life. And it's about, I think, relationship is actually about us being conscious to be the best we can be in all those relationships, whether it's with a partner, with a husband or a wife, or a child or a parent or a colleague or a friend. And in every single place we exist in, and we exist in relationship, to be conscious of what we put into the space between us and the other, or the others.
Absolutely. So, just in case people are a bit unaware, what do you mean by the space? I'm aware that when two people come together, the relationship exists in the space that they create as a relating couple, whether that's colleagues, friends, or lovers.
I suppose space is actually the place between anything. So if we're existing like now, having a conversation together, then between us there is space, and the space is where we're connected as well. And we're connected actually through dialogue, and through but it's not just verbal dialogue. It can be through not speaking, and through the looks, that people can do when they do that sort of raising the eyes. That can often make the space not very safe. Or if somebody asks a question of somebody and the other just doesn't answer, that obviously can make the space very unsafe. If the tone of voice, so it isn't just the words that are used, it's the way the words are used. So, if there's defensiveness, if there's criticism, all of those things can make the space very, very unsafe. And this is something that if we take responsibility for what we're putting in, then we can make a big difference. And every interaction, there is the possibility of growth happening, or somebody being hurt. So it can happen, or somebody healing. I mean, it is happening in every single moment of every day, and every word we utter, and it does make a difference. And it will happen, how we are in the shop with somebody, how we are when we get, in a taxi or on a bus or a train or a plane, and everywhere we go, we are relating to one another, and we're making a difference by what we put in the space. And of course, in families, particularly, what if there is a family where there's a couple, well, even if they're not living in the same house, a couple that have produced children together, then the space between them is the space the children are being brought up in. So therefore, being really conscious of what we're putting into that space makes a big difference, because if the space is toxic, then that's the space the children are being brought up in. And that doesn't mean just in the house. It can mean if a parent's are separated from each other or divorced, it's still very, very vital to be conscious of that space, because it is affecting the children who haven't got the same power because they're little.
Absolutely, absolutely, very vulnerable.
And of course, actually, that brings us to the fact that actually in relationship with each other, we are often relating to one another actually from a space of our childhood, rather than being adults.
Absolutely. And in fact, we sort of attract people into our lives that actually that reflect relationships we've had in the past from generally childhood. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. And I mean, actually, so much of relationship is unconscious, which is why when we talk about conscious relationship, it comes with having had some time to think about what we have experienced in our life, the meaning we've attached to those experiences, to those circumstances, to the people around us, and then how we have become the person we are now. Now, sometimes we will be acting from a space of great reactivity to things that happened to us in our childhood, where we became wounded, where even with the best intention in the world, the adults around us were not able to meet our needs, to have the time at the time we might have needed some extra input. Those points, if we aren't heard, or we're told that what we say or think isn't okay, or it doesn't fit with that family, then what happens is the child has to survive, of course, or we have to survive, and our children have to survive. So what happens is that we'd adapt our behaviour to make sure we're safe.
Absolutely.
So because a child can't believe the adults won't know best or look after them, so if there is, it becomes clear that being too noisy or speaking too much, or any behaviours, singing at the dinner table, or so many things that can go on in family life, if it becomes apparent that to behave in a certain way, which would be who we were, wasn't acceptable, what happens is, to survive, we'd adapt our behaviour. And this can be very effective. You go through life, and some adaptations can create how we are in our careers. So, we will have been taught to really, we might have adapted by being very funny, or being very, telling lots of stories and making people laugh, or we may have adapted by being very self-sufficient and going away on our own. And we can often, or smiling a lot to make things safe at home, and we can find that in life this still works for us to a certain extent.
Of course.
But of course, we all want to be whole, we all want to be ourselves, and so we will unconsciously attract to people who often have similar wounding, or are carrying parts of ourselves, expressing parts of ourselves we hid away.
Okay.
So we may have, found that it wasn't acceptable to express anger, or it wasn't acceptable to talk loudly or talk at all. And then we might get attracted to somebody who talks a lot, or somebody who expresses anger freely, or it's often a complementary adaptation, but a similar wounding. Not always, but that is quite a common thing. Or we go towards with somebody who came from a family of sporty people, and we may have been an artist, and it may have never been realised, or a writer or a creative part of ourselves. So we'd get attracted to writers or creative people. I mean, this is quite simplistic, but
of course, yeah,
it sort of demonstrates. But not realising that these people are, carrying those parts of ourselves or expressing those parts. So the unconscious has moved towards these people, and it isn't always partners. It can be colleagues, it can be someone we work for, sometimes it's our own children, and it starts to come out in. And then of course what happens is the person, it seems often brilliant at first, there's often a big feeling of completion or connection or having come home, but what then happens is the person will do something that reminds us of something that our caretaker did, which was in the negative. So an example of this is that, I always found that, my father was one of a more emotionally withdrawn person, born of that generation in 1912. It was more usual that people were taught to not show their emotions.
Absolutely.
And so I was often attracted to people who were similar, but initially would open up to me, and then inevitably if they would withdraw or behave as my father did, then there would be a reactivity in me that would feel a sense of loss, abandonment, and this was a need for the healing inside, but actually the same thing could keep happening.
Right, absolutely. Very interesting, isn't it? So what you're saying is that these adaptions that we have from a very, very young age actually form a lot of our relationships as an adult.
Yes, yes.
And that formation is because we're either looking to live out something we're used to or to heal that.
Well, I think it's really that we're looking to heal it, but inevitably we can find we live out the same thing. So there's that, we end up saying you're so like, you're so like my father. You're so, or people become so like the person that that they're used to, that they grew up with, and often we will do the adaptation that's similar. So, but often then there comes the chance to do the things we didn't do in childhood. So there may be great explosions of emotion that weren't allowed in childhood or didn't happen, right, because the frustrations can be so great. So, if we've been controlled a lot or managed a lot in childhood, then if somebody starts to, seemingly, they may actually or seemingly manage us in a relationship, then it can be incredibly frustrating.
Of course.
And the reactivity that occurs can be very, very destructive in an unconscious relationship. Whereas if we are going into relationship consciously, then we'll have more understanding of these reactivities, and when we react to something somebody's done which seems irrational, so somebody might, I don't know, eat the last piece of bread in the bread bin, and somebody will come along to find that's gone and react with huge amount of, maybe it's seemingly out of proportion disappointment and frustration. But if they'd come from a family where they were, they didn't feel that they ever were considered, or their needs weren't met, or that they weren't thought about, then that can touch that wound, and then the reaction can be seemingly out of proportion to going to the bread bin and finding there's no bread there. Right. And that can be very damaging, because say the person reacts with great extreme anger or criticism of the person who's eaten the bread, then they may have been criticised a lot as a child. So therefore, if they've been criticised or told they're selfish, or told that, which is quite common, this is what happens, then they will react as well, because they have their, being criticised button touched. So then this huge, great separation occurs, and it's incredibly painful, and it's a power struggle ensues where each person is trying to be heard, get their needs met, have something different happen, whereas in fact the same thing keeps happening and happening and happening.
They end up re-wounding.
Yes,
re-wounding.
yes.
Yeah,
and then, either this can just exist in a cycle, or a pattern that they kind of get used to, but it's very, debilitating and it energy sapping, and takes away passion and takes away connection, and that often ends in, or it can end in separation, divorce, and actually, of course, the same thing keeps happening, that they got hurt in relationship when they were young, or little, and get hurt again in their intimate relationship, whereas in fact, we we got hurt in relationships, and of course it's where we can heal.
Absolutely.
So with consciousness, relationship can be a place of healing and growth, and there's always growth wanting to come out of conflict. And with that in mind, it makes a massive difference, because if we know that every time we hit conflict in relationship with either our partner or our children or a friend, that actually what's happening there is that growth's wanting to happen.
Absolutely.
We'll have a completely different view of it.
Absolutely. It won't be passing blame onto the other, it will be looking at ourselves in that situation.
Yes, and what's happening? What's happening in the dynamic? What's going on? And having the ability to, stop and say, what are we doing here together? Because it is that when we do these things, we're making them up together, and that actually when there has been a reaction to something that seems out of proportion to what's happening, then often 90% of us is in childhood. 90% of us has gone back to the past and is seeing the person through the filter of their own projection of onto their mother, their father, and there's nothing. They're not in the present anymore. So if we react in our body, if we feel that feeling of frustration arise, then it's very important at that point to press pause and recognise that we're now not in the present with this person, and that we're acting out of a wound from our past. Right. And that can make a huge difference.
Absolutely, just the awareness of that.
Yes, yeah, just the awareness. And actually, a really good, the Imago relationship theory is from Harville Hendricks, and it's really a really powerful way of looking at relationship. And he's written a book called Getting the Love You Want, which is really good, and I could highly recommend. And there are other ones that he and his wife Helen have written together, because they've done a lot of work together in their own relationship. And one of the things that the tool that they use and I use with people, because if a couple particularly are in conflict, or anyone's in conflict, it isn't just couples, obviously, it's children and parents and friends and colleagues, and
yeah.
yes, if there's conflict, but if there's first an awareness that in that conflict there's some growth wanting to happen, and if everything's slowed down and the first space is being able to hear the other, then then some healing can occur in that space. So there's a tool called the intentional dialogue, which actually slows dialogue down, because we all exist in this, what we put into this space, and it's the dialogue we're having. So with intentional dialogue, by slowing everything down, it means that we can start to hear the other and really validate what they're saying and empathise with it. So how it happens is one person has the space to speak, and the other person literally mirrors what they're saying, and then everything is heard. And if we're heard, then we can start to relax, and we can start to feel we're safe, and the reactivity isn't going to happen. And then if the position is validated and understood, and we can literally get into the shoes of the other person and experience, listen and experience what it must be like for them, and understand that and empathise, then the space starts to become safe. And then within that, if we become responsible for starting to explore and understand where we're wounded and what our reactivities are about, then we have the basis to start to make relationship a space for being able to connect again, rebuild that passion, get the connections we all crave, and mean that the relationship we can become our own therapists at some level. Not that we're going to therapy each other, but it becomes a space where therapy and it's a therapeutic space, actually.
Of course, because you're watching yourself, taking responsibility for your own reactions. They're going to change, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. And we've found this.
We have, yeah.
Yes, that every time there's been anything that has arisen, that if I know that something is going on that's in my body that is to do with an old reaction, if I'm aware of it then, and I've shared it with you, then it makes a huge difference.
Absolutely.
To what's happening.
Well, it's the difference between being clear about what's going on for you or what's going on for me and reacting,
Yes.
and this whole thing cycling and blowing out of proportion.
Yes.
And so it comes back to what you were saying about the space being either a rewounding space or
yes.
a healing space.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think that that by even being able to start to understand that we're actually often very similar when we're in conflict with somebody, that actually it's very I say interesting. I mean, hearing people in conflict is also, it's very horrible for the people in conflict. But if I've been listening to some people I've been working with who are in conflict, what you can hear is they're often saying the same thing. They're really wanting connection.
Absolutely.
They're really wanting to be heard. They're really wanting to be loved, actually, and their needs met. And what we've all crave is to be, loved for who we are.
Of course, absolutely. But that starts with the self, doesn't it? You have to be able to love yourself and share that to be loved by another.
That is true, but of course we get the sense that we're not loved in relationship.
Of course.
So it's when we're little that we've internalised. If somebody, if a parent raised an eyebrow sometimes at a child who's sensitive, the child could interpret that as they're not loved, they're not okay. If a parent is harsh with a child, or it's quite a minefield at some level. But where we've internalized that we're somehow not lovable or not loved, happened in relationship.
Absolutely.
So it's also in relationship that we can feel loved again. So yes, of course, it's ultimately that we have to accept ourselves and love ourselves, but that can also occur while we're in a relationship all the time. So by being conscious of our reactions and conscious that we might go into the wrong position or quickly feel that we're going to be rejected or abandoned, or feel that we're not understood or not heard. Now, if we've got an awareness of, by exploring and by going and maybe talking with a therapist and finding out where our wounds are and what we're most likely to respond to and how we're going to see the world through that filter, then we can start to heal on our own in relationships. So if we feel, for instance, that we've been told off a lot and we feel that we're wrong, then if we're quickly going to that position, then at least we can be conscious if somebody, might want to give us some feedback on the way we've done something, or if we, somebody wanting to send us a letter to say, it depends what profession we're in, but say that, give us feedback that they'd like something different. All these things that can touch somebody who feels they're wrong, can touch their wound.
Of course.
If we know the wound, or if we've got a wound of not being heard and somebody doesn't seem to be paying attention to us or isn't listening to what we're saying, or if we've got an awareness of our own wounds, then we know that if we're reacting, we're often just making that up. It's from our own filter, and that the more we know that, the more we can do our own work on healing.
Absolutely.
If we are relating consciously with other people who we're safe enough to explore this with and talk it through with, then of course the relationship becomes even more of a space where we can, in that space, become more at ease, heal those wounds, love ourselves more, accept ourselves. So, we get hurt in relationship and we heal in relationship. I think there is no place we're not actually in relationship.
Of course. Absolutely. Like you say, going down the shops, talking
Yes.
to the shopkeep,
Yes.
It's interesting. Yeah, very interesting. So healing in relationship takes a lot of awareness. To be conscious in every moment takes a lot of awareness, doesn't it?
It does. I think it takes the commitment to doing it, because if we're going to be conscious about, you know, how we're relating, then there is a commitment to that, and it takes patience with ourselves, patience with the other, and you know, and seeing that there's a willingness, and it takes being willing to mend things if they're, you know, if things go wrong, which inevitably they do.
Absolutely.
Inevitably there'll be times where, you know, it's too late, it's all gone wrong that moment.
Of course.
You know, something's happened, there's, you know, when people are tired, or there's been a lot going on in a day, or there's less resistance, and things happen, you know, something can just trigger just like that, and somebody's reacted, it's all gone wrong. It happens in cars, you know, driving can be a space that's difficult, where you know, people either tell people how to drive, or they don't good at directions, or there's so many of everyday life, or there's, you know, the dishwasher hasn't been emptied again, and I always I never actually don't think I've ever emptied the dishwasher. It's another cupboard as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely.
You magically emptied the dishwasher. It got magically emptied this morning.
You did, didn't it? Yeah.
But I think it's another cupboard, I think.
Yeah, you do.
And I never can remember whether it's the clings are clean or not.
That's right.
But, you know, when people say you never empty the dishwasher, you always leave things, you know, on the surface, and all those everyday things, or you know, you find that somebody's, you know, told someone how to drive again. All these areas that trigger childhood frustrations, where, you know, they remind us of not being supported, or being told what to do, or being, you know, micromanaged. All these things that can go wrong, and great big reaction can happen.
Absolutely.
But there's always that space to mend it, and if a couple, both people in the couple are willing to mend it, or friendship, it's miracles can happen. You know, absolute miracles can happen through the consciousness and staying in the body, as we said in the Healing the Childhood Wounds video, that if we're aware of our body, the reactivity happens in the body. So there'll be, you know, a feeling in the tummy, a feeling in the heart, a tensing. Absolutely. That can occur when, you know, we're triggered. If we're conscious of that ourselves, then we can work to our own, to you know, manage our own bit of what we're putting in that space.
Absolutely.
And, you know, love's more of a verb than anything. You know, it's more of what we're doing in every moment, both in the words we say, the actions we take. And I think that, you know, with love, people hope it's a kind of feeling, but that initial romantic love, which is really amazing and wonderful, of course, is often the time when there is more of a projection onto the other of all the things we see that, you know, we're wanting to have our needs met.
Absolutely.
And it's a space where there is a relaxation and a safety, because one of the triggers of somebody hasn't behaved in a way that reminds us of the wounding in childhood. Absolutely. But when it first happens, it can happen, you know. It can happen at the most slightest thing. Somebody doesn't ring when they said they were going to, or is, you know, short on the phone, or there's all manner of things that happen that instantly the space doesn't feel as safe.
Absolutely. It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is.
So what we're saying really is two people committing to being as conscious as they possibly can be in any given moment, to really cherish the sacred space between them, to be aware that at times reactions are going to happen, but to not react against the reactions to understand that it's actually a really good space for somebody to heal something that is an adaptation from the past or a wound from the past.
Yeah, so there's the growth, is wanting to come out of that conflict.
Absolutely.
And that actually every space between all of us, if we're all the time as individuals committing to keep it sacred, committing to keeping it safe, then we can, every interaction makes a difference, or we can make a difference in every interaction. And the more that we all do that, the more our hearts open, the more creativity can occur.
Absolutely.
And the more we can relax.
Absolutely. The more
And
we can relax.
and appreciate one another.
Yeah.
And appreciate, all the possibilities, and validate all the differences, because difference is exciting, and it's the very thing that can create the create the conflict at a level, but it's also the very thing that is exciting.
Absolutely. We don't all want to be the same, do we? Well, I think that's a great discussion on conscious relationships.
Yeah, exactly, and it's just worth committing to being as conscious as possible, because even though it's hard at times, and even though if we're very wounded it can feel a huge hill to climb, it's worth every single step.
I think so. I think so. Brilliant. I think that's enough said for that.
Or we could probably go on and on. So it's actually, yes, that's enough for now.
Yay, thank you.